Welcome to another edition of the Left Hand Path. Here we discuss issues and topics relating to metaphysics, astrology, and astrotheology. The word sinister comes from the Latin for left hand. With a basic understanding of Kabbalah and astrological principles, we can shed light on the occult forces underpinning the globalization project, exposing its sinister progression towards the left-hand path. For 1,400 years, Islam has influenced the lives of millions of people. It is a religion based around the energies and characteristics of the planet Venus, a planet associated with aspects of love, pleasure, and liking. Its astrological glyph is a circle or the soul over the cross of the physical material world. Due to Venus's metaphysical orientation, it is predominantly concerned with the soul's relationship towards the material world. A monotheistic society aligned mainly with energies associated with Venus are more likely to manifest those characteristics within the fabric of their society's behavior as a whole. When assigning Moon Day as the first day of the week, Friday or Venus Day becomes the fifth day. Friday is also Islam's holy day. Venus produces an interesting geometric pattern as it orbits both the Sun and the Earth. During its orbit, it will produce 5 conjunctions with the Sun. This is one of the reasons why the number 5 has been associated with Venus for thousands of years. When we look at the 2 signs of the zodiac ruled by Venus, Taurus and Libra, we discover that they make up the 2nd and 7th houses, 2 and 7, or 7 and 2. This is interesting because each angle of a pentagram is 72 degrees, the same number of virgins waiting for those good Muslims who finally make their way into paradise. With the glyph for Venus being a circle, focal consciousness, over the cross, the physical, it reflects the conscious mind's dilemma of balancing what part of the physical realm it chooses to focus on. This is essentially a metaphysical reflection of Libra, I balance, and Taurus, I have. Muslims pray 5 times a day and follow the 5 pillars of Islam. Their first pre-dawn prayer meeting, known as the Fajr, takes place when Venus appears on the horizon at Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Positive characteristics of Venus energy, the morning star, are all the pleasurable aspects of love and liking, whereas the inversion of this positive energy gives rise to the negative or undesirable side of Venus. This could be the true basis behind the personified character known as Lucifer, the light bringer. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Isaiah 14:12. The giant black cube at Mecca, known as the Kaaba, was thought to have started life as a pre-Islamic observatory, a place where stars and solstices could easily be viewed and calculated. In Islamic tradition, the Kaaba, Arabic for cube, was believed to have been built by Abraham at a time when pagan religious practices were conducted at its altar. A metaphysical explanation for the black cube as a temple can be found when considering that the black cube is not a natural phenomena. It is not something which is commonly found throughout nature. Consequently, it is a shape which reflects those artificial and machine-like qualities associated with the archons, qualities which oppose Sophia Gaia's expression of divinity and spiritual beauty. Therefore, it is possible that the Kaaba's initial pre-Islamic role was as an altar to the demiurge and his 365 lower archonic creations. Muhammad ibn was born in Mecca in 570 AD. His father Abdullah ibn was a member of the Banu Hashim clan, but tragically died a few months before Muhammad was born. When Muhammad was 6, his mother Amina, on a trip to Medina, also died, leaving him in the care of his grandfather Abd al-Muttalib, who would also die just 2 years later. He eventually found himself under the care of his uncle Abu Talib, who would become his protector as well as a great influence for him throughout his life. When Muhammad became a young adult, he began working as a simple shepherd, but later he accompanied his uncle on merchant caravan expeditions into Syria and other cities around the Middle East. His time as a merchant was successful, due to his good and trustworthy reputation which he had developed along the way. When Muhammad was 25, he was invited to help a distinguished Quraysh merchant lady by the name of Khadijah, a widow 15 years his senior. They eventually fell in love and were married. Living in and around Mecca, Muhammad would occasionally go up to the rocky hills on the outskirts of the town to relax and meditate. One night he had a profound vision, a revelation in which the one true God revealed himself to Muhammad. Over the next few years, Muhammad withdrew from his life as a merchant and spent more time contemplating in the caves outside Mecca. Muslims believe that Muhammad was the final messenger of God who, from 610 AD, received direct verbal revelations from the Almighty. All these revelations were eventually compiled in their holy book, the Quran, together with the Hadith, a comprehensive record of Muhammad's words and actions. The Muslims also believe that the arrival of Muhammad was foretold in the Bible. But when the Comforter is come, who I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceedeth from the Father, he shall testify of me. John 15:26. As Muhammad's revelations increased, together with the number of followers, the Quraysh tribe, who at that time ruled Mecca, saw Muhammad's teachings as a threat to their traditional way of life and their well-established trading arrangements. During that time, the Kaaba was a polytheistic pagan religious focal point for various tribes to congregate and pay homage to their chosen gods. Weapons were not allowed in the vicinity, and as a result, a large market grew around this relatively safe environment. The Quraysh saw Muhammad's monotheistic one-God approach as a destabilizing ideology which could undermine their business interests. Consequently, the leaders of the Quraysh began to apply pressure on Muhammad in an attempt to bring him back in line with their procedures. They eventually placed a complete ban on the city from conducting any form of trade with Muhammad, including preventing him and his supporters from buying food. When this failed, they escalated into violence, killing a number of Muhammad's followers who were vulnerable. By 622, the situation in Mecca had become too dangerous for Muhammad and his followers. Consequently, they abandoned their home and city of birth to begin a new life in the northern town of Yathrib, which at that time was an oasis town of belligerent pagan and Jewish tribes. With a reputation for fairness and trustworthiness, Muhammad was asked by Yathrib's various tribes to help mediate with their internal squabbles. With nothing to lose, he offered his assistance, which gave him the opportunity to make his mark within the new city. The result of Muhammad's involvement led to the creation of the Constitution of Medina, a contract between Muslims, Jews and non-Muslims concerning their relationship towards one another. It was the first constitution of its kind in the region, promoting mutual respect for the lives, property and places of worship for all involved, essentially regulating the rights and obligations between all the city's descendants of Abraham. With a new constitution, the city of Yathrib became a more peaceful place, attracting trade and improving the overall lives of its citizens. At this point, Muhammad received a new revelation persuading him that he must prepare to fight back against his enemies. Fight in the way of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress. Indeed, Allah does not like transgressors. And kill them wherever you overtake them, and expel them from wherever they have expelled you. And fitna is worse than killing. And do not fight them at al-Masjid al-Haram until they fight you there. But if they fight you, then kill them. Such is the recompense of the disbelievers, and if they cease, then indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful. Quran 2, 190, 192. In 624, a large Quraysh trading caravan was returning from Syria back to Mecca. Muhammad and the Muslims decided they would go on the offensive by capturing the caravan in the desert. Anticipating this, the Quraysh diverted the caravan and sent a small army into Yathrib to attack the Muslims. Muhammad and his forces met the Meccan army at a watering hole on the outskirts of the city called Badr. A skirmish erupted, which ended in the Meccan army retreating. Once the news of this victory spread, the credibility and status of Muhammad and his followers grew among the common Arabs. Consequently, more recruits joined the Muslims, growing the religious order together with its army. At this point, Muhammad had another revelation, a message telling him, from now on, all Muslims must pray facing the direction of Mecca. So, from wherever you go out for prayer, O Muhammad, turn your face towards Al-Masjid Al-Haram, and indeed it is the truth from your Lord, and Allah is not unaware of what you do. Quran 2, 149. Before this new revelation, it was considered normal practice to point towards the holy city of Jerusalem. When the Muslims began facing Mecca to pray, it was seen by the Jews as an insult to their tradition, which antagonized and offended many traditional Jewish tribal leaders. It also symbolized the progressive deterioration of Jewish-Muslim relations. Furthermore, just as they had done with Jesus 600 years before, the Jews also rejected Muhammad's divine connection and would not accept him as an apostle of God. The more successful and powerful Muhammad and his followers became, the greater was the deterioration in relations with the Jews, leading to secret meetings and negotiations between the Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir in Yathrib and Muhammad's enemies in Mecca. This eventually erupted in a showdown where Muhammad felt compelled to act against the underhand actions of those Jewish tribes who he felt had compromised the constitution of Medina, Yathrib, by planning to attack him. As a result, his army surrounded the Jewish villages for a 2-week siege, before finally banishing them from the city, sparing all their lives. 1 year after the Battle of Badr, the Quraysh sent an army 3 times larger than Muhammad's in an attempt to crush him. Although the Muslim army was outnumbered, the battle resulted in a stalemate, giving Muhammad time to bolster his position. On his return to Yathrib, Muhammad discovered that some of the remaining Jewish tribes on the outskirts of the city were actively helping his enemies defeat him. In 627 AD, the Quraysh of Mecca returned with help from the Jewish tribes with an army of 10,000 warriors, more than 3 times the size of Muhammad's 3,000 men. However, Muhammad gained the initiative by digging a massive trench to the north of the city, making it extremely difficult for the enemy's cavalry to cross. In an attempt to break the deadlock, the Quraysh secretly negotiated with a Jewish tribe in Yathrib known as the Banu Qurayza, asking them to attack Muhammad from the south. When this failed to gain any serious momentum, the Quraysh gave up and retreated back to Mecca, leaving the Banu Qurayza Jews to the mercy of the Muslims. Once again, Muhammad felt betrayed by the Jews, who had dishonorably reneged on the constitution of Medina, Yathrib. He sent his army to the village, and after a 25-day siege, the Jews surrendered. This time, Muhammad had a problem. He knew if he banished them from the city, like he had done with the previous Jewish tribes, they may join with his enemies and come back later to attack him. He decided to hand over judgment to an independent mediator, who found the tribe guilty of treason and sentenced all the men to death. The women and children were spared, only to become slaves to the Muslims. All 800 men were eventually put to the sword. Although the deaths of these Jews was not based on race or religious grounds, the knock-on effects created deep divisions within Muslim-Jewish relations, which, it could be argued, has never recovered. Following on from the Battle of the Trench, a truce was declared between the two opposing sides. However, in 629, the Quraysh broke this truce by attacking one of Muhammad's allies. This set in motion the beginning of the end for the Quraysh. A few months later, in 630, Muhammad gathered an army of 10,000 Muslims and headed south for Mecca. Although the Meccan army put up a fierce resistance, fighting for a whole month, they were eventually defeated by Muhammad and his army, who entered the city in triumph. Instead of putting his enemies to the sword, Muhammad, true to Allah's command, declared a merciful amnesty and forgave all those who fought against him. When the city was safe, he made his way to the Kaaba, walked around it 7 times before removing all 360 idols which represented various pagan gods of the time, leaving only the black stone, which is still there to this day. At this point, he declared that there is only one true God, Allah. In the ancient pagan world of star worship, many idols represented planets, stars, and constellations. It is an interesting coincidence that there were 360 idols in the Kaaba, the same number of degrees in the zodiac, and the act of circulating the Kaaba 7 times before removing the idols could have some metaphysical significance to the 7 planets of the ancient world, or, as we shall discover later, the 7th Sephirot of victory on the Kabbalistic tree of life. By 631, the last pagan stronghold fell to the Muslims, giving them complete rule over all of Arabia. The only stone left in the Kaaba was the meteorite, which could have fallen to earth as Venus moved into its new orbit around the time of Abraham. From the early days of Islam to today, the Kaaba is the focal point of the Muslim religion, just as the glyph for Venus is the circle of focal consciousness over the cross of the physical material realm. The act of circulating the black cube at Mecca reflects these metaphysical principles. Muhammad had now done all he had set out to achieve. In his final sermon to his followers the very next year, he commented on how he had abolished usury from the land that now belonged to the Muslims. Verily your blood, your property, are as sacred and inviolable as the sacredness of this day of yours, in this month of yours, in this town of yours. Behold, everything pertaining to the days of ignorance is under my feet completely abolished. Abolished are also the blood revengers of the days of ignorance. The first claim of ours on blood revenge which I abolish is that of the son of Rabbi B. al-Harith, who was nursed among the tribes of Sad and killed by Hudhail, and the usury of the pre-Islamic period is abolished, and the first of our usury I abolish is that of Abbas B. Abd al-Muttalib, for it is all abolished. Extract from Muhammad's final sermon. Prior to the Muslims, Arabia was once ruled by a significant power known as the Jewish kingdom of Himyar. According to the Institute of Advanced Studies, few scholars have been made aware of this aspect of history. The Himyarite kingdom was established around 110 BC in the area of southwest Arabia, where Yemen is today. It initially spread its influence through trade between the Roman Empire, Africa, Arabia, and the spice trade with India, growing as a formidable fighting force along the way. The ruling kings of the Himyar Empire appear to have abandoned paganism in favor of Judaism around the year 380 AD. Over the next 150 years, the Abyssinians and Romans began military campaigns towards Yemen in an attempt to control the population and trade through the influence of Christianity, around 518, the Jewish king, Yosef Nuas, became angry at the ingress of Christianity towards his own empire and sphere of influence. As a consequence, he sent an army to attack the northern city of Najran. After taking control of the city, he burned the Christian churches and put to death any Christian who would not convert to Judaism. The number of victims vary depending upon accounts, but it is believed that around 1,000 were either put to the sword or burnt to death. We can now say that an entire nation of ethnic Arabs in southwest Arabia had converted to Judaism and imposed it as the state religion. Glenn Bowersock, Institute for Advanced Studies. Once the word of the massacre reached Byzantium and the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, forces were amassed from both kingdoms and sent into Himyar, with the aim of putting an end to King Yosef's plans of conquest. The king of Ethiopia not only wanted revenge for the slaughter of the Christians in Najran, but he also wanted back the territory which his kingdom had held during the 3rd century. From the Byzantium perspective, the Jews at that time were allies of Persia, and Persia was a rival of the Byzantium Empire. So a victory over the Jews in Himyar would also be a tactical blow for the Persians. The traditional Arab tribes living in and around Mecca and Yathrib throughout this period were caught up in the middle of these great Christian Judaic clashes, probably leaving them with a disdain for both. In 525, Yosef's kingdom came to an end, when Christian forces took over his kingdom, fragmenting the Jews throughout most of Arabia. Pockets of Judaic strongholds sprung up, who, allied with the Persians, caused damage to Christian ambitions of expansion. In 570, about the same time Muhammad was born, the Persians, allied with the Jews, took back control of Himyar by driving out the Ethiopians from the Arabian Peninsula. Furthermore, in 614, Persian forces, bolstered by Jewish tribal warriors, took over Jerusalem during the Byzantium-Sasanian War 602-628. Under this backdrop, it is clear that anyone trying to unite the people of Arabia was under a great deal of pressure from all sides. For Muhammad to achieve what he did is remarkable under the circumstances. However, as his power base grew, it would come at the expense of his relations with both Christians and Jews alike. Once the Quran was finalized and written down, it was used to promote Muhammad's prophetic words and teachings and to successfully bring people together under one unified religion known as the Ummah, the community. For the first 13 years of Muhammad's preaching, he only had around 150 followers. But once they took up arms to defend themselves against warring tribes, they found they were able to repel their enemies even when outnumbered. Each successful campaign would bring forth more recruits and followers, swelling the numbers to almost 100,000 at the time of Muhammad's death in 632 AD. Each time a warring enemy tribe was successfully defeated, the Muslims gained more credibility along with the spoils from each conflict, bringing in a great deal of wealth and prestige. Because the Muslims forbade usury, they freed themselves from the shackles of debt and were beholden to no other source for their money or wealth. Consequently, within a very short time of only 200 years, the Muslims had gone from strength to strength, becoming one of the largest and greatest empires the world had ever seen. With the strict abolition of usury, it became relatively easy for the Muslims to increase their standard of living at a steady rate, without the parasitical influence of moneylenders sucking their wealth away. The devil was known as Diabolos in ancient Greek, a name derived from two words, divide and abolish. Satan or Saturn is the accuser. It has divisive qualities which can abolish an individual's ability to live and embrace the now by trapping their cognitive rhetoric in a deceptive spiraling cycle of negative pessimism concerning past events, loss and frustration. Saturn was Satan, a planet associated with Judaic religious ideology. So what went wrong with Islam? How did Satan get his way, dividing and abolishing a religion which almost united the whole world? When Muhammad died in June 632, divisions began almost immediately. The problem was who would take over from Muhammad as successor. His followers were divided. Many wanted to elect a new leader on merit, while others regarded his family lineage as natural heirs. Muhammad only had one surviving daughter, Fatima, who was married to Ali ibn, a cousin of Muhammad, and for this reason many considered Ali as the logical successor. However, the father of Muhammad's third and youngest wife, Abu Bakr, also had a claim to the position, with many followers supporting him. This led to the split which we now call Sunni and Shia. Shia Muslims regarded Ali as the first and only legitimate caliph, leader of the Muslims. But the majority voted for Abu Bakr, who was eventually chosen to be the first caliph. After the death of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, the first caliph, began the process of compiling the material for the Quran. It was eventually written down in a standardized version under the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, 579 to 656. Over the next 200 years, the Muslims spread their influence at an impressive rate. With two major caliphates, they took control of the Middle East, North Africa, and even Spain. Later, through trade routes, they became a major influence in various parts of Southeast Asia. After the second caliphate, the fifth caliph of the Abbasid Caliphate, Harun al-Rashid, initiated what many call the Golden Age of Islam. While most of Northern Europe was heading into the Dark Ages, the Muslims were entering an era of great success. In Baghdad, Rashid set up the House of Wisdom, where he brought scholars from all over the world to work on translating the best classical knowledge known at that time into Arabic. It was a time of incredible progress, where some of the world's greatest Islamic buildings were created, along with many advancements and discoveries in science and mathematics. While most of Europe was struggling to feed itself, the Islamic Spanish city of Cordoba was installing street lighting for its citizens. The city's mosque, which was built in 780, was an architectural masterpiece, with a capacity to hold 5,000 worshippers, becoming the envy of people from all over the world. In the 10th century, after hearing about the wonderful city of Cordoba, the Saxon nun and poet Hroswitha wrote, "The brilliant ornament of the world shone in the west. A noble city, Cordoba, was its name, and it was wealthy and famous, and known for its pleasures, and resplendent in all things. With its military capacity, discipline, and usury-free economics, the Muslims became a threat to the very survival of the Holy Roman Empire, especially in the trading crossroads of the Middle East. Consequently, the Pope began to militarize the Catholics' position with the Order of the Knights Templar. The Crusades began in 1095 and went on for almost 200 years, steadily weakening the Muslims in the Holy Land. Also at this time, the Mongols under Genghis Khan were spreading their unique brand of fear and barbarity, sacking Baghdad in 1258, putting an end to the House of Wisdom, destroying their vast libraries along the way. They executed the Caliph Al-Mustasim Billah along with many of his men. This is generally considered as the end of the golden age of Islam. Weakened by attacks from all sides, Islam, as it evolved, branched off in various directions, just as a tree grows branches which derive from the root. Some offshoots became extreme interpretations of the original foundations of Islam, far removed from the initial teachings and spirit of Muhammad. The older the tree grows, the further and more numerous the branches become. The most extreme sect of Islam began with the preacher and activist Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, 1703 to 1792. Commonly known as Wahhabism, he began his reform movement in the regions of Najd, central Saudi Arabia, in the middle of the 18th century. This version of Islam evolved into a far-right, ultra-conservative and fundamental offshoot of Sunni Islam. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab eventually joined up with a local leader to create a politico-religious alliance which later became the House of Saud, then the Kingdom of Saud in 1932. Today Wahhabism is the official state-sponsored form of Saudi Islam in the country, gaining power and influence from the wealth generated from their natural resource of oil. It is estimated that there are around 5 million practicing Wahhabists in the Persian Gulf region alone. However, the majority of Sunni and Shia Muslims disagree with many of their interpretations concerning Islam, regularly denouncing the Wahhabists as a vile sect or even as a satanic faith. The US State Department has estimated that over the past 4 decades, concerns in Riyadh have directed at least $10 billion to select charitable foundations towards the subversion of mainstream Sunni Islam by the harsh intolerance of Wahhabism. Telegram, 2017. We have to frankly say that al-Wahhabis' superficial and false teachings and grasping on to the shell is the main obstacle standing in the way of Muslims' goal to unite, and the biggest cause of the killing, dispersing and breaking up of Muslims. Intelligence Colonel Syed Marnad Najern al-Arneri. The birth of al-Wahhabi movement and its historic roots. In 2008, a top-secret report was released from the United States Defense Intelligence Agency, a report written by Iraqi intelligence on the birth of Wahhabism. The report suggests that the British Empire during the 19th century infested the Middle East with its agents, looking for a way to undermine the Muslims in an attempt to weaken the Ottoman Empire and to lay the foundations for a Jewish state in Palestine. In 1973, the autobiography of the British Middle Eastern spy Himyar was translated. In the book, he includes British plans to dominate Muslim countries. Because Muslim men have a strict tradition of discipline and adherence to their daily practices and principles in regard to Islam, the British colonials were finding it difficult to corrupt them through simple traditional means which had been successful throughout the world and in other countries. The British Colonies Ministry sent the trained spy Mr. Himyar to the city of Baghdad in Iraq in order to create disorder between the Sunni and Shiites and find the weak point of Muslims so he can penetrate its body to diffuse the unity of Islam. Also, his mission in this trip was to identify the conflicts amongst Muslims and create an atmosphere of disagreement, expiation and mistrust amongst them, as well as make up different faiths and form fake colonial religions to enable the colonizer to reach its objectives in creating division. According to Himyar, British agents were sent all over Arabia with orders to create extreme differences among the 4 main groups of Sunni Islam. The agents went out all over Arabia promoting fake and extreme ideologies in an attempt to divide the Muslims and get them to kill each other. This is when they came across Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab. The British found in Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab many attributes such as the love of glory, immorality and extreme views, so they came to realize that he is the right person to establish the group they wanted. Both groups, al-Wahhabi and al-Shaykhiyya, are established on wrong views, therefore they brought about disorder, bloodshedding and killing. In 1745, Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab met with Muhammad bin Saud in a meeting where they both agreed to support one another. An alliance where Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab would be in control of religious matters and Mohammed bin Saud would control the government. Some Islamic scholars point out that the genuine roots of both Mohammed bin Saud and Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab were of Jewish descent, with Mohammed bin Saud being a descendant of a Jewish merchant from Basra by the name of Mardecai bin Ibram bin Mushi, and Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab's grandfather, Tajan Shulman, was also a member of the Jewish community in Basra, Iraq. The intelligence report also claims that Shulman had been banished from Damascus, Cairo, and Mecca for his practice of quackery. In his book, History of al-Saud, the author Nasir al-Sayed claims that in 1943 the Saudi ambassador in Cairo had paid a man by the name of al-Tamimi 35,000 jinni to produce a fake family tree which would tie both the Saudi family and Muhammad Abd al-Wahhab's family to the Prophet Muhammad. Nasir was a Saudi dissident who was reportedly abducted by Saudi agents in Beirut in 1979, put on a plane bound for Saudi Arabia, where it is believed that he was thrown out at an altitude of 10,000 feet. His body was never found. To make sense of the situation in the Middle East, especially concerning Saudi Arabia, a basic understanding of British involvement throughout the region is necessary. With a strong sense of unity and stability inherent within traditional Islam, the British Empire sought ways to undermine the Ottoman Empire and fragment Sunni Muslims. Anticipating a major war during the early 20th century between the major powers in Europe, the British sent a network of agents into Arabia in an attempt to create alliances with various Arabian tribes and factions, alliances which would come in useful in attacking the Turks once the war began. One of these agents was T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. Because of his knowledge relating to the area as a historian and archaeologist, he was assigned the position of intelligence officer to the Arabs. His job at the start of World War I was to see if the Arabs had the will and resources to start a rebellion against the Ottoman Turks, who at that time ruled Arabia. Prior to World War I, there were three major factions dominating Arabia and the Bedouin tribes. The first was the Hashemite family tribe who ruled over the Hejaz region, led by Hussein ibn Ali al-Hashimi, the Sharif of Mecca. He was reported to be the 37th generation descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, regarded as the significant heir and leader of the Sunni Muslim Arabs in the Hejaz region. However, prior to World War I, his kingdom was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire and also an enemy to the House of Saud in the east. The second significant tribe were the House of Rashid, rulers over the Najd region and also formidable enemies to the House of Saud, a rivalry in which they spent years competing with one another for the capital city of Riyadh. The third tribe was the House of Saud, which had joined with the formidable fighting force of the Ikhwan, the brotherhood of pro-Wahhabi nomadic militants. As a united front, they promoted fundamental and radical Islam, viewing all non-Wahhabists as infidels, enemies who they felt it necessary to defeat. Because of their ruthlessness and aggressive tenacity, the British thought they could negotiate with their leader, Ibn Saud Abdul Aziz, and use him as a counterweight against the efforts of the other Arab tribes who were trying to unite the country. In 1915, the Treaty of Darwin was signed between the British and Abdul Aziz, an agreement which made the lands of the House of Saud a protectorate of the British Empire. In return, Abdul Aziz agreed not to expand his territory into any other areas under British control. While this was taking place, Lawrence of Arabia was negotiating in the west with the Sharif of Mecca and his son Faisal bin Hussein in an attempt to persuade them to unite and liberate themselves from their Turkish overlords. Through Lieutenant Colonel Sir Henry McMahon and Lord Kitchener, the British High Command sent a guarantee to Hussein ibn Ali, the Sheriff of Mecca, which stated that if the Arabs helped the British defeat the Ottoman Turks, the British government would in return recognize a united Arabian state under the control of the Arabs. Great Britain would, in exchange for support from the Arabs of Hejaz, guarantee the independence, rights and privileges of the Sharifate against all external foreign aggression, in particular that of the Ottomans. Telegram of the 1st of November 1914 from Lord Kitchener to Faisal bin Hussein. Believing that the Western Arabs would not be able to sustain an attack on the Turks for long, the British did not take their agreements with the Arabs seriously. While the Western Arabs were being cajoled by the British to help fight the Turks, the Sauds were given instructions to sit and wait, holding on to Riyadh and the area they had seized in 1913 around the port city of Al-Hofuf, and not to get involved in the Arabian Revolt to the west. Under the pretext of a new united Arabia, together with British supplies of hardware and munitions, the Sharif of Mecca, the genuine descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, rallied what Arabs he could and began an offensive against the Ottoman Turks. The first attacks on Medina were unsuccessful, repelled by Turkish artillery and German aircraft. However, as more munitions poured in at the request of T.E. Lawrence, the Arabs gained new momentum. They decided to leave the Turks in Medina isolated and went north towards their ultimate goal of Damascus. The Sharif of Mecca called upon Auda Abu Taya, a former warrior from the house of Rashid, to come and help in the Arab Revolt. Auda was regarded as one of the greatest warriors of his day. Furthermore, if the Arabs were to succeed, they would need all the help they could get. A plan was put in place to attack the Red Sea port of Aqaba at the northwest tip of the Hejaz. Alder, along with 500 Arab warriors, devised a surprise attack on the Turkish garrison on the edge of the city. On the 2nd of July 1917, the Turks fell, with 300 of their soldiers being slaughtered at the expense of a handful of Arabian warriors. The attack was such a success, the British High Command started to take the Arab Revolt seriously. With Aqaba now in the hands of the Arabs, British and Allied forces were able to use the port to bring supplies and troops for a future push north in an attempt to liberate Jerusalem and Damascus from the Ottoman Turks. While all this fighting was taking place, the British High Command back in England were hatching secret plans of their own. In May 1916, together with the French, the British produced the Sykes-Picot Agreement, an arrangement which, in the event of victory, redefined and shared the northerly territories of Arabia between the two major powers, neglecting any legitimate claims made by the Arabs. Also in November 1917, Lord Balfour, as Foreign Secretary, wrote to Lord Rothschild, the head of the international banking cartel, promising the Zionists, in the event of victory, the area of land known as Palestine. Although the Arabs thought they were fighting for their freedom and independence, the European powers had other plans. When Lawrence of Arabia, fighting alongside the Arabs, found out about these secret agreements, he was furious. Realizing the magnitude of deceit to which he was caught up in, not only towards the Arabs, but also to him personally, he had no other choice but to keep the information to himself. For my work on the Arab front, I had determined to accept nothing. The cabinet raised the Arabs to fight for us by defining promises of self-government afterwards. Arabs believed in persons, not in institutions. They saw in me a free agent of the British government, and demanded from me an endorsement of its written promises. So I had to join the conspiracy, and for what my word was worth, assured the men of their reward. In our 2-year partnership under fire, they grew accustomed to believing me, and to think my government, like myself, sincere. In this hope they performed some fine things, but of course, instead of being proud of what we did together, I was bitterly ashamed. T. E. Lawrence, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. In the summer of 1916, there were around 30,000 Arabs united in the struggle against the Ottoman Empire. By 1918, that number had grown to 50,000. The overall casualty figure is unknown, but many lost their lives in an effort to bring freedom to their country. Ashamed of his predicament, Lawrence, without spilling the beans, told Faisal Hussein if they could get to Damascus before the British, they would be in a strong position to hold on to their independence. It was evident from the beginning that if we won the war, these promises would be dead paper. And had I been an honest adviser of the Arabs, I would have advised them to go home and not risk their lives fighting for such stuff. At the end of 1917, the British forces moved on Jerusalem. After victories against the Ottomans, seizing control of towns along the way, most of the Turks had abandoned the city by the time the British arrived. While the British were strengthening their position in Palestine, the Arabs under Faisal were making plans to reach Damascus. This would take time, as there were still many towns and villages to liberate along the way. By the time the British and Arabs reached Damascus in October 1918, the Turks, anticipating what was coming, had fled, and the new Emir Faisal was chauffeur-driven into the city as the head of the new independent Arabian government. Over the next few weeks, Faisal became aware of the British secret negotiations with the French and the Zionists through the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Balfour Declaration. He felt bitterly betrayed by the British, objecting strongly to their deceit and underhand tactics. He walked out on many meetings with the British who were trying to negotiate a new settlement. At this point, Lawrence, already back in England, was invited to Buckingham Palace to be presented a knighthood by King George V. However, unhappy and ashamed by the whole episode, he turned the king's offer down as a protest for the British betrayal towards the Arabs. With Emir Faisal's dreams of an independent Arab state having slowly evaporated, T.E. Lawrence tried to help him by promoting his cause at the Paris Peace Conference in early 1919. Unfortunately, all they could do was present their case and wait for the results. During the Paris Peace Conference, Chaim Weizmann, president of the Zionist movement, approached Emir Faisal to sign an agreement for amicable cooperation between Arab and Jews within the Middle East, especially concerning Palestine. This agreement was known as the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement, a document which was used by the Zionist delegation at the 1919 Peace Conference to stress that Zionist plans for Palestine were given prior approval by the Arabs. Faisal believed that by accepting the proposals for a Jewish state, supporting mutual agreements with the Allies, he could increase the probability of achieving an Arab statehood for his own people. He wrote, "Dear Mr. Frankfurter, I want to take this opportunity of my first contact with American Zionists to tell you what I have often been able to say to Dr. Weizmann in Arabia and Europe. We feel that the Arabs and Jews are cousins in having suffered similar oppressions at the hands of powers stronger than themselves, and by a happy coincidence have been able to take the first step towards the attainment of their national ideals together. The Arabs, especially the educated amongst us, look with deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. Our deputation here in Paris is fully acquainted with the proposals submitted yesterday by the Zionist organization to the Peace Conference, and we regard them as moderate and proper. We will do our best, in so far as we are concerned, to help them through. We will wish the Jews a most hearty welcome home. With the chiefs of your movement, especially with Dr. Weizmann, we have had and continue to have the closest relations. He has been a great helper of our cause, and I hope the Arabs may soon be in a position to make the Jews some return for their kindness. We are working together for a reformed and revived Near East, and our two movements complete one another. The Jewish movement is national and not imperialist. Our movement is national and not imperialist, and there is room in Syria for us both. Indeed, I think that neither can be a real success without the other. People less informed and less responsible than our leaders and yours, ignoring the need for cooperation of the Arabs and Zionists, have been trying to exploit the local difficulties that must necessarily arise in Palestine in the early stages of our movements. Some of them have, I am afraid, misrepresented your aims to the Arab peasantry and our aims to the Jewish peasantry, with the result that interested parties have been able to make capital out of what they call our differences. I wish to give you my firm conviction that these differences are not on questions of principle, but on matters of detail, such as must inevitably occur in every contact of neighbouring peoples, and as are easily adjusted by mutual goodwill. Indeed, nearly all of them will disappear with fuller knowledge. I look forward, and my people with me look forward, to a future in which we will help you and you will help us, so that the countries in which we are mutually interested may once again take their place in the community of civilized peoples of the world. Believe me, yours sincerely, Faisal. While the world waited for the results from the Paris Peace Conference, Emir Faisal was crowned king of the Arab Kingdom of Syria by the Syrian National Congress government on March 7, 1920. However, in the following month, an offshoot meeting to the Paris Peace Conference gave France the mandate over Syrian territory. Consequently, the new King Faisal was asked to step down and leave the country. Outraged by this, Faisal and his followers put up resistance, which began the Franco-Syrian War. After nearly 3 months of fighting, the French took control of the country and kicked out the new king by installing their own puppet government. With no kingdom and nowhere to go, Faisal went to live in the United Kingdom, hoping to negotiate with the British on their own soil. The following year, in an attempt to resolve the Arab issue, Winston Churchill, acting as colonial secretary, asked T.E. Lawrence to join him at the Cairo Conference of 1921. Because of the violent backlash caused by the Sykes-Picot Agreement and Balfour Declaration, the British arranged a series of meetings in an attempt at diffusing the escalating violence. As a result, the British asked Faisal to be monarch of the newly created British Mandate of Iraq, an area in which most of the inhabitants had no clue as to who he was. Furthermore, the majority of the Arabs living in Iraq were Shiite, and because the Hashemites of Hejaz were Sunni Muslims, the Iraqis had not played a significant role in the Great Arab Revolt against the Turks. Even so, Faisal, seeing very little choice in his predicament, accepted the offer and became King Faisal I of Iraq on the 23rd of August 1921. As a result of the Paris Peace Conference, the hopes and aspirations of the Arabs towards an independent nation were brushed aside in favour of the major victorious powers of World War I and their Rothschild Zionist sponsors. Consequently, the Sykes-Picot Agreement was comprehensively enforced, together with the initiation and promotion of Zionist aspirations towards a national homeland of their own in Palestine. The old policy of divide and rule, diabolos, was playing out yet again in favour of the British Empire's move towards global governance. Syria was placed in the hands of the French as a mandate, while the British were given control of the lands south of Syria. From Palestine in the west to Basra in the east, the area was now to be called Iraq, with Faisal I as its new king. The British had the Arab descendants of the Prophet Muhammad fragmented, exhausted and disillusioned from years of fighting for a nation-state which, due to greater powers than themselves, would never be allowed. Throughout the war years and the partitioning process, with all the efforts made and the lives lost, Ibn Saud and the Wahhabis were sitting patiently, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to begin their next move. Backed and protected by the British under the Treaty of Darwin, the House of Saud was now given the green light to initiate the clean-up operation by unleashing the Ikhwan Wahhabists on the Sunni Arabs to the north and west. Faisal had written to the Zionists during the Paris Peace Conference, giving them his best wishes in their endeavours over Palestine. After the British reneged on their initial promise for an Arab independent nation-state stretching from Palestine to the Gulf, Sharif Hussein of Mecca was in no mood to accept either the Balfour Declaration or the new borders drawn up by the French and British victors. No matter how much the British tried to cajole him around to their new post-war reality, he would not budge. The Sharif let it be known that he will never sell out Palestine to the Empire's Balfour Declaration. He will never acquiesce to the establishment of Zionism in Palestine or accept the new random borders drawn across Arabia by British and French imperialists. For their part, the British began referring to him as an obstructionist, a nuisance, and of having a recalcitrant attitude. The British let it be known to the Sheriff that they were prepared to take drastic measures to bring about his approval of the new reality, regardless of the service that he had rendered them during the war. After the Cairo Conference in March 1921, where the new colonial secretary, Winston Churchill, met with all the British operatives in the Middle East, T.E. Lawrence was dispatched to meet the Sheriff to bribe and bully him to accept Britain's Zionist colonial project in Palestine. Initially, Lawrence and the Empire offered 80,000 rupees. The Sheriff rejected it outright. Lawrence then offered him an annual payment of £100,000. The Sheriff refused to compromise and sell Palestine to British Zionism. When Lawrence could see no amount of bribery was working on Sharif Hussein of Mecca, he changed tact and threatened him with an Ibn Saud takeover. Churchill had previously spoke to the Sheriff's son, the Emir of Transjordan, Abdullah bin al-Hussein, during the Cairo Conference in 1921. Churchill made it clear to Abdullah that he must make an effort to persuade his father into accepting the new proposals. If he did not, the British would unleash Ibn Saud against Hijaz. Ibn Rashid of the House of Rashid and ruler over the Kingdom of Najd, who throughout 1920 had expanded his territory north towards the borders of Palestine, also rejected these new proposals offered by the British. As a consequence, the British were worried about another Arab alliance, making trouble for them in the future. By December 1920, the British were sending Ibn Saud a monthly allowance of £10,000 in gold bullion, which is equivalent of $500,000 in today's money. This also came with thousands of rifles, field guns, and ammunition supplies. Because of Sharif Hussein's refusal to compromise or consent to new British demands, Ibn Saud and his Wahhabi warriors in September 1921 were unleashed on the town of Hale, Central Arabia. A show of force designed to persuade Sharif Hussein one last time. Following this victory, Ibn Saud declared himself the Sultan of Najd. On top of this show of force, with Ibn Saud on his doorstep, the British asked Sharif Hussein to seriously reconsider the British offer. The proposals that were put in writing and sent to the Sharif were not even looked at. The Sharif tore them up and drafted his own rejection statement. After 3 more rounds of negotiations had failed, a message was sent to Ibn Saud in the summer of 1924, stating that the British Empire had terminated all discussions with the Sharif. Within weeks of this telegram, an attack into the Hijaz took place by Ibn Saud and his Wahhabi forces. Following the attacks, telegrams were sent to both Hussein's sons, Abdullah in Transjordan and Faisal in Iraq, telling them both to stay put and not to give any assistance to their father in the Hijaz. By October, Sharif Hussein was forced to abdicate. He fled Mecca for the port of Aqaba, the same port 7 years earlier which he had liberated from the Turks in aid of the British war effort. He was eventually pushed out, finding exile in Cyprus. Reports of this takeover were portrayed in the media as a religious conflict. No mention was made of British geopolitical objectives, a tactic still in use today as the rest of the area is decimated and divided, allowing no future union or expansion of traditional Islam, a religious tradition which once created the Islamic Golden Age of Enlightenment. By the end of 1925, the Hejaz had been conquered by Ibn Saud and his band of fanatical warriors. On the 10th of January, he declared himself to be king of the Hejaz. The following year, he also announced himself as king of the Najd. Both kingdoms were now firmly under his control. Because Wahhabism is such an extreme and perverted version of Islam, traditional moderate ways of living, which had been enjoyed for over 1,000 years, came to an abrupt end. The Wahhabists' ruthless, fundamental and conservative approach to life made them a feared force among the people who had just been conquered. A number of the extreme fundamental elements at the top of the Ikhwan movement were becoming increasingly unhappy with Ibn Saud's close relationship with the British Empire, and saw it as collusion with the enemy or the infidel. Consequently, a revolt erupted in 1927, rebelling against the authority of Ibn Saud himself. Over the next 3 years, clashes would erupt between forces loyal to Ibn Saud and the 10,000-strong Ikhwan warriors. Without the help of the British and Kuwaiti forces, Ibn Saud and his new kingdom could have been overrun by an even more ruthless enemy. By 1930, the revolt had been quashed, and by 1932, the two kingdoms of Najd and Hejaz had been brought together under the one kingdom now known as Saudi Arabia. A few years after the Cairo Conference, T.E. Lawrence lost interest in his military career and took early retirement. As a huge national hero, Lawrence had influence over those who respected and admired him. In 1935, he died in a mysterious motorbike accident, which many of his friends and admirers believed to be an assassination. During this period, he was aligning himself with Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British fascist movement. On the day of the accident, he was on his way to see his friend Henry Williamson, a Hawthornden Prize winner, a British Literary Award, who was negotiating a future meeting between Adolf Hitler and Lawrence. Churchill attended the funeral. Looking back at the divisions and fragmentations imposed on traditional Islam over the centuries, one can't help but suspect that outside influences of a sinister nature have played a major part in the slow decline of a once powerful religious ideology. As a competitor to the expansion and hegemony of other religions such as Christianity and Judaism, it could be argued that some versions of Islam we see today have been undermined, deviating so far from the initial roots that even the Prophet Muhammad would have difficulty recognizing them. Because of its once glorious, formidable, united past, Islam has been targeted by satanic forces for a slow, incremental, divisive demise. The Wahhabists have throughout the years developed a reputation for merciless brutality, with a desire not only to kill people but to destroy artifacts and relics of our ancient history. This is all very contradictory to the activities of the Muslims during the Islamic Golden Age, where they went out their way to bring together ancient history, philosophy, and science in order to preserve it. This ruthless fighting machine of Wahhabist warriors, which we are up against today, could be of use to any malicious or sinister organizations who wish to pervert the course of history by erasing elements of our true past from the record. It is my belief that the globalization project is still funding and utilizing extreme elements of Islam to this day, not only as a mechanism of division in a physical sense, but also as a tool that sows seeds of mistrust and Islamophobia in the minds of non-Muslims throughout the world. These extreme factions, which do not represent traditional Islam, are being groomed and used by satanic organizations to undermine the old system of sovereign nation states in an effort to create the chaos necessary to promote the globalists' new system of global governance. As the decades unfolded, and with the descendants of Prophet Muhammad dethroned and out of the way, the Rothschild Zionist Kingdom of Israel was now positioned to dominate the Middle East, using Judaism as a cover for their geopolitical and financial endeavors. The Zionist movement has used everything in their arsenal to advance their agenda, while publicly distancing themselves from the House of Saud and the Wahhabists. Behind the scenes, both powers appear to be singing from the same hymn sheet regarding specific issues. Over the years, both the House of Saud and Israel have received huge financial support from the UK and the United States. For this reason, they share a common foreign policy towards the rest of the Middle East, the same policy as their financial sponsors. They both see Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah as a common enemy. Even before the creation and recognition of the State of Israel back in 1948, the UK Zionist project for the Middle East was financing Ibn Saud and his warriors. Many credible sources over the years have disclosed the Jewish ancestral lineage of the Saudi family, which underpins the genuine close relationship between the House of Saud and the Jews as a whole. On the 17th of September 1969, King Faisal al-Saud stated in the Washington Post, "We, the Saudi family, are cousins of the Jews. We entirely disagree with any Arab or Muslim authority which shows any antagonism to the Jews, but we must live together with them in peace. Our country, Arabia, is the fountainhead from where the first Jew sprang, and his descendants spread out all over the world. It appears to the average observer that over the past few decades, those Islamic countries showing prosperity, strength, and unity have been targeted for either sanctions, regime change, or destruction by certain elements within the West. A continuation of the old British Empire's divide and rule policy to destabilize Islamic countries even further. Although diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia on an official level appear to be non-existent, suspicion regarding a secret relationship or alliance has been suspected for years. On the 19th of November 2017, Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz said that Israel has had covert contacts with Saudi Arabia amid common concerns over Iran. This is the first public admission of cooperation between the two countries by a senior Israeli official. Israel-Saudi Arabia relations, Wikipedia. In November 2017, Israeli Channel 10 News published a leaked diplomatic cable that had been sent to all Israeli ambassadors from the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs after the resignation of the Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Harari. Written in Hebrew, the cable confirmed cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia in escalating the situation in the Middle East. The cable called for Israeli diplomats to do everything possible to ramp up diplomatic pressure against Hezbollah and Iran. To complicate this issue even further, there are a race of people known as the Tartarians, which many historians know little about. Some speculate that they were once a great and sophisticated empire stretching from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Pacific. Old maps clearly identify Tartary or Great Tartary as a huge landmass. Its people were described as Turkic, an ethno-linguistic culture found throughout Asia, North Africa, and parts of Europe. Tartary had its own flag, their own kings, and their own language. Because Tartary was so big, it was often divided into manageable sections with a prefix denoting the ruling power for that area, creating Russian Tartary, Cathay or Chinese Tartary, Central Tartary, and East Tartary. According to official history, as the Europeans and Eastern cultures of Mongolia and China mixed with the Tartarians, the term fell into disuse, replaced by what we see today. We even see Marco Polo dressed in traditional Tartarian costume on his Wikipedia page, standing next to a flag of Tartary. Cathay or Chinese Tartary, which included Xinjiang, Mongolia, Manchuria, and Qingji, most of which were not within the protectoral proximity of the Great Wall of China, suggests that the Great Wall was built to keep out some pretty fierce competition, separating ancient China and Tartary. In the introduction to the book History of the Two Tartar Conquerors of China, published in 1854, it states, "It embodies the observations of various missionaries in China, together with the highly interesting narratives of 2 journeys into Tartary in the years 1682 and 1683, made by the famous Jesuit father Ferdinand Vibest in the suite of the Chinese emperor. The other, that at a time like the present, when a revolution of the most formidable character had rendered the maintenance of the throne of China by the existing Tartar dynasty a matter of great uncertainty. Furthermore, it goes on to shed light on the importance of the Tartarian Empire's capability. Father Rao dying in 1638, his duty rested solely with Skal, who was engaged upon it during 3 consecutive reigns, that of the last sovereign of the Ming dynasty and those of the 2 first Tartar Chinese emperors. Meanwhile, however, although the Manchu rebels had gained the mastery in the north of China, the south had not yet bowed to the Tartar yoke. All hope, however, from such a source was soon put to an end, for in that same year, 1651, Chan Chi, the youthful heir of the late Tartar conqueror, being declared of age, assumed the reins of government at Peking, and the Tartars, impatient of completing their conquest, made a desperate attack upon the southern provinces. Yun Li was vanquished, and both he and his youthful son perished. Helena was led captive to Peking, and the imperial race of the Ming became extinct. The emperor himself was anxious to take lessons off him in mathematics, and at his request Vibest made him master of the Tartar language, in order to dispense with an interpreter in communicating his instruction. The maintenance of the military character of the Tartars, by which their final establishment on the throne of China was secured, was in a great measure due to the emperor's frequent hunting excursions beyond the Great Wall, thereby exposing them to fatigues and dangers in many respects analogous to the trials of actual warfare. According to the Internet Encyclopedia, as Mongolian control in the West weakened throughout the 15th century, the Kazan Khanates took over and its people became known as Tartars. They were eventually conquered in 1552 by Russian forces under the reign of Tsar Ivan IV, becoming the first Muslim subjects within the Tsar's empire. This Internet Encyclopedia states that after the Bolshevik Revolution, Tartars were targeted for extermination. In the 1920s, most Tartar leaders and intellectuals who wanted independence were eliminated through execution or exile. This policy against the Tartars continued to some extent until the early 1950s. Encyclopedia.com, Tartars. It is important to point out, as the victors write the history books, they occasionally try to eliminate important aspects which they see as counterproductive to their own importance. In 1999, a CIA document was released into the public domain written in 1957, suggesting that the Soviet government set out to erase certain aspects of Tartarian history from the official record, essentially rewriting history to suit their agenda and modern narrative. Let us take the matter of history, which along with religion, language and literature constitute the core of a people's heritage. Here again the communists have interfered in a shameless manner. For example, on the 9th of August 1944, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, sitting in Moscow, issued a directive ordering the party's Tartar Provincial Committee to proceed to a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tartar history. In other words, Tartar history was to be rewritten, let us be frank, was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to Great Russian aggression and to hide the facts of the real cause of Tartar-Russian relations. And this was no isolated case. In every Muslim area within the USSR, historians, on orders from the Communist Party, have rewritten history to distort the facts so that the Russians appear always in a good light. Needless to say, histories which present the facts truthfully have been withdrawn and destroyed so that the present and future generations of Muslims are forever denied the chance of learning the true facts of their nation's past. CIA document 1957. When considering the Bolshevik Revolution was partly financed by the international financial cartel, it opens up a whole avenue of historical deceit. Our history really could be, as Napoleon suggested, a set of lies agreed upon. The first claim of ours on blood revenge, which I abolish, is that of the son of Rabbi B. al-Harith, who was nursed among the tribe of Sad and killed by Hud Hail, and the usury of the pre-Islamic period is abolished. And the first of our usury I abolish is that of Abbas B. Abd al-Muttalib, for it is all abolished. Extract from Muhammad's final sermon. Those who consume interest cannot stand on the day of resurrection, except as one stands who is being beaten by Satan into insanity. This is because they say trade is just like interest, but Allah has permitted trade and has forbidden interest. So whoever has received an admonition from his Lord and desists may have what is past, and his affairs rests with Allah. But whoever returns to dealing in interest and usury, those are the companions of the fire. They will abide eternally therein. The Quran 2:275. When a nation, race or culture frees itself from the parasitical clutches of usury within a relatively short period of time, that union, free from debt, will see the benefits of an honest monetary system by becoming wealthy beyond the scope of perceived normality. The modern private central banking system, a usurious enterprise, is the foundation which underpins modern globalization, which is dominated by the Rothschild banking family, a dynasty which was founded in the mid-18th century. This banking dynasty is a large Jewish-owned financial cartel, which, through debt, influences the present and future prosperity of each nation's economical and political positioning within world commerce. Through government borrowing, conditions are placed on loans offered by the IMF and World Bank, which slowly maneuver those countries towards political, social, and financial parity with one another. This is the main tactic used to steer each country towards their place within the one-size-fits-all mono-mechanism of globalization. For the global financial usurious monetary system to be complete, everyone must be under its control. This is one of the main reasons why Islam is targeted by Western powers due to its religious laws forbidding usury. Over the past 2 centuries, the British Empire teamed up with the Rothschild Zionist banking cartel to promote each other's interests as they expanded their empires. The banking cartel would supply the money necessary for war and conquest, while the British would make each country under its rule safe for usury to prosper. After the fall of Arabia to the House of Saud, resistance to the global financial system built on usury diminished. According to Islamic scholar Imran Hosin, the modern world of Islam has become impoverished and enslaved by riba. Since 1924, however, riba has penetrated the total economic life of Muslims all around the world. The financial imperialism inherent in riba has delivered the entire world of Islam by its very throat into the hands of enemies with sharpened knives. Indeed, all of mankind is now trapped in the world of riba. Riba has impoverished the masses in the entire Muslim world. Riba has rendered Muslims powerless to resist financial blackmail. Because of riba, Muslims now live a collective life not entirely dissimilar to slavery. He who pays the piper continues to call the tune. Riba has paralyzed us. Imran Hosin, Islamic scholar. The Quran is quite specific when it comes to the severity of punishment for those involved in usury. The result is no less than war waged by Allah himself. O you who believe, be careful of your duty to Allah and relinquish what remains due from usury, if you are believers. But if you do it not, then be appraised of war from Allah and his apostles, and if you repent, then you shall have your capital, neither shall you make the debtor suffer loss, nor shall you be made to suffer loss. Quran 2:278. Many Muslims see the West as a place of decadence, where the infidel align themselves with satanic energy in a sea of materialism. Iran has publicly referred to the United States on more than one occasion as the Great Satan. Not surprising when one understands the nature of usury, together with knowledge of the Federal Reserve being a private central bank, and the heart of the world's reserve currency. The Quran warns its followers about the dangers of associating with certain friends and alliances, and is specific with regard to what to look out for in order to protect the interests of the Muslim people. O you who believe, do not take the Jews and the Christians for friends. They are friends of each other, and whoever among you takes them for a friend, then surely he is one of them. Surely Allah does not guide the unjust people. Quran 5:51.